Wyoming, the least populated state in America, is still one of the most breathtaking places, with its dramatic scenery stretching from rolling hills covered in sagebrush to dense forests, towering mountains, and winding rivers. This is where I was born and raised. My family owns a ranch outside of a small town called Lander. A little bit about me. I'm 6 feet 3 inches and around 215 pounds. My close relatives call me Ranch Kid because of my size. I take it as a compliment. After all, Luke Skywalker from Star Wars was called Farm Boy, and he's awesome, so take that, Grandpa. My absolute favorite pastime is fly fishing. There's nothing quite like the rush of seeing a trout take your fly. Wyoming is famous for fly fishing, and my go-to river is the Green River. It's a bit of a drive to get to my secret fishing hole, but it's always worth it. The most terrifying experience of my life happened in 2014. I was 20 years old at the time. It was late summer, August to be exact, and around 3 in the afternoon. I remember it so clearly because of what happened. To get to my fishing spot, you have to take a dirt road about 3 miles into the woods. Then there's a small turnout where you park before hiking about half a mile deeper into the trees. Honestly, I have no idea how my dad first found this spot, but let me tell you, it's packed with rainbow trout. When you step out of the woods, you're right on the riverbank. The river is roughly 35 feet across, with a swift current on the far side and slow-moving, deep pools closer to the shore, perfect for fishing. For those unfamiliar with fishing, these calmer pools are where trout like to hang out. They're lazy and prefer to let the current bring their meals to them. Since it was a warm afternoon, I skipped my waders and waded straight into the refreshing water. I started casting, wearing my fishing glasses to cut down on the glare. Then things got strange. I had been fishing for about 45 minutes when I cast my line again. Suddenly, from across the river, a tree crashed to the ground with a loud thud. It jolted me because I was so focused on the water. The river at this section wasn't very loud, so the sound was startlingly clear. I turned toward the noise, and then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a black bear slowly making its way to the river. But after a closer look, I realized it wasn't a bear at all. It was shaped differently, leaner, with longer limbs. My second thought was that it might be a black wolf, but I quickly dismissed that idea because it was way too big. Then it stepped fully out of the trees, and my mind went blank. Standing there on the opposite bank, staring at me, was a creature covered in sleek, jet-black fur. Its eyes, an eerie golden amber, locked onto mine. It had the head of a wolf, but its body was something else entirely. It was muscular, with defined features visible even through its thick fur. Its legs, though shaped like a dog's, were long and powerful. Its arms were unnervingly human-like, with hands that ended in razor-sharp claws. That was the part that shook me the most. I even took off my sunglasses and rubbed my eyes to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. But it was still there. The strangest thing? It just sat down on the opposite shore, watching me fish, like a dog, but not. I was so shocked that I completely forgot my line was still in the water. Then, in a sudden splash, a massive trout took my fly. The creature's ears perked up. It looked at me, then at my fishing line, then back at me, then the line again, almost like it was waiting for me to do something. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe because, in that moment, it didn't feel like it wanted to hurt me. It was just watching. I quickly reeled in the fish. It was huge. I unhooked it and was about to release it when the creature let out a deep, guttural growl. I froze. Then, in a slow, deliberate movement, it rose onto 2 legs and stepped into the river, like a person. My heart pounded as I started backing toward the shore. That's when it made a short, sharp grunt and pointed one clawed finger at the fish in my hand. My mind was racing, and without thinking, I bolted out of the water and onto the riverbank, dropping the fish as I went. My hands went up instinctively, and I stammered, "It's yours! It's yours!" probably 4 times. The creature waded through the water, picked up the still flopping fish in one hand, and looked at me. I swear it almost seemed annoyed, like I had just ruined its meal by letting it touch the ground. Then, with unnerving precision, it slid a claw through the fish's gill and out its mouth. exactly how a person would handle a fish. Still watching me, it stepped back into the river and swished the fish back and forth, rinsing it off. Then it bit into it, dropped back onto all fours, and crossed the river again. Just before vanishing into the trees, it paused. Turning back, it pulled the fish from its mouth and gave it a little wiggle, almost as if taunting me, before disappearing into the woods. I sprinted to my truck, tossed my gear in the back, and tore out of there. I was still shaking so badly that I got pulled over on my way home. After explaining everything, the officer must have seen how freaked out I was because he just let me off with a warning. When I told my family, they were stunned, but they believed me. To this day, it's the most unreal, terrifying thing I've ever experienced. I still go fly fishing, but I have never and will never return to that spot. Some things in this world don't make sense, and you never know what might be out there. Torn and hollow inside, Landon grew up in the backwoods of eastern Kentucky and western West Virginia. In these parts, folks often whisper about strange sightings and eerie encounters. I never paid much mind to those stories. Figured they were just folks looking for attention, spinning yarns to entertain. I've been a dedicated hunter since I was old enough to hold a rifle, spending countless hours deep in the forest, week after week, during hunting season. If creatures like that were real, I was sure I'd have seen one by now. But that belief changed forever. The land where we hunted the most had no cell signal. It was about a half hour from the nearest town, Big Laurel, Kentucky. Once we reached the property, we had free reign over about 750 acres of thick forest, rolling pastures, and a web of old four-wheeler trails. My family had been hunting here for generations, long before I was born, and none of them had ever experienced anything unusual. I never thought anything would happen to me either. It was late November, the peak of rifle season. We arrived at the property before dawn, around 5 a.m., gathering our gear for the morning hunt. At the time, we only had one ATV, so my granddad dropped me off first before heading back to get my dad. He left me near an old, decaying tree stand that hadn't been used in over 30 years. Just go straight up the ridge, hit the old logging trail, and it'll take you right to it. Can't miss it. Meet me back here at noon for lunch, he told me. I followed his directions without issue, arriving at the stand with plenty of time before daylight. To kill time, I pulled out my old iPod Touch. Being 14 years old at the time, I needed a distraction from the fact that I was sitting alone in the middle of the woods. As the first light of dawn crept in, I noticed something unsettling. Absolute silence. Not a single bird, not even the rustling of leaves. My heartbeat was the only sound. An uneasiness settled in, lingering throughout the morning hunt. I saw nothing, heard nothing, and by lunchtime, I was more than ready to leave. I made my way back down the ridge and waited for my granddad. When he finally arrived, we headed into town for lunch at the nearest little diner. The landowner happened to be there as well. When he asked where I'd been hunting, his expression darkened. "Be careful up there," he warned. "My dad built that stand a long time ago. Hunted there just a couple times, but he never went back. Never would say why." I shrugged it off. By the time I returned for the evening hunt, the woods seemed normal again. Birds chirping, squirrels scurrying about. A couple of hours passed, and then I heard footsteps approaching. The closer they got, the quieter everything else became. With years of hunting experience, I knew those slow, deliberate steps belonged to a deer. Ignoring the unsettling silence, I raised my rifle, took aim, and fired. I was certain I'd hit it, so I waited until just before dusk to track it down. By the time I started searching, the sun had nearly set. Still ignoring the eerie quiet, I followed the blood trail, but something felt wrong. Then I saw it. The deer lay up ahead, but it wasn't just dead. It was torn nearly in half. No blood pooled around it. No organs. No sign of a struggle. It was like something had gutted it in an instant. What could have done this in just minutes? As I stepped closer, I heard slow, deliberate footsteps behind me. They stopped when I stopped. My flashlight darted in every direction, revealing nothing. cold sweat ran down my back. I bolted toward the deer, grabbed its antlers, and dragged it behind me. Then, from behind, came a sound that sent ice through my veins. Branches snapping, trees shaking, and worse, a voice, a deep, guttural growl. "That's not yours." I ran as fast as I could, the deer dragging behind me. Up ahead, I could hear the ATV approaching. I dropped the deer and waved my flashlight wildly, signaling my granddad. Before I reached him, a sound ripped through the woods. A scream, deep and distorted, like a pig squealing, but impossibly loud. For a moment, I truly thought I wouldn't make it out. My granddad pulled up, and through tear-filled eyes, I told him everything. Without hesitation, he grabbed his rifle and flashlight and headed up the hill. Silence. After 10 tense minutes, he came back, carrying only the front half of my deer. He moved fast, wordless, loading it onto the ATV. Before we could drive off, the scream tore through the forest again. We never sped away from that property so fast in our lives. Years have passed, and we rarely talk about it. Nothing like that has ever happened to me again, and we still hunt those woods. But sometimes, I find myself hoping to see whatever it was that stalked me that night. I was born and raised in the southeastern United States, in a small town in Mississippi. From an early age, my father and grandfather taught me essential outdoor skills: hunting, fishing, camping, and bushcraft. It was no surprise that I spent most of my free time in the woods. When I was about 18, I decided to take a solo bow hunting trip. Nothing big, just one night at my camp and a full day of hunting. I packed my gear, let my parents know my plans, and set off. Normally, I would walk to my hunting spot since it wasn't too far, but something told me to take my truck this time. Maybe it was just instinct, or maybe I didn't feel like carrying all my gear for miles. Whatever the reason, I'm glad I did. I reached my campsite around 6:15 p.m. It was mid-November, so darkness had already set in. I had just enough light to find a good parking spot, but I had to use my flashlight to make the rest of the trek. By 6:35, I was at camp, setting my gear down and gathering firewood. I pitched my tent, organized my things for an easy morning departure, and then made myself a simple dinner, some canned beans and sausages. The night was peaceful with the usual sounds of the woods. After eating and relaxing, I settled into my tent on my sleeping pad and dozed off. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to complete and utter silence. If you've spent enough time in the wild, you know that this kind of quiet isn't normal. It's usually a warning sign. I sat up, gripping my revolver, listening. About 40 yards in front of my tent, I heard twigs snapping and heavy footsteps. The steps sounded deliberate, like something walking on two legs. It wasn't unusual for other hunters to be out here, but this land belonged to my family, and anyone else would have needed permission. If that were the case, my father would have mentioned it. Something felt off. I slowly unzipped a tent window and peered out. The moment I looked, the night returned to normal: crickets, owls, and rustling leaves. I convinced myself I had imagined it, that I was just groggy from sleep. Eventually, I drifted off again. My alarm woke me at 5 a.m. Time to hike the 2 miles to my tree stand. I grabbed my gear, not bothering to double-check it, assuming everything was fine from the night before. That would turn out to be a big mistake. A mile into my hike, I heard movement off to my right. The woods were dense, with a narrow path running through them. Crouched, waiting to see what it was, a white-tailed buck emerged. Something about it was strange. It was too thin, and its eyes looked cloudy, almost blind. Still, it behaved like any other deer, grazing, lifting its head to check its surroundings. But its movements were wrong. It staggered, swaying like it was drunk, its gait unnatural. As the sun rose, I got a better look. The buck was in worse shape than I thought. Smelled awful, far worse than any animal should. Its ribs were visible, its fur was patchy and discolored, and its antlers were shaped oddly, nothing like a normal whitetail's. I no longer cared about bagging it for sport or food. I just wanted to put it out of its misery. Here's where failing to check my gear came back to bite me. My younger brother had borrowed my arrows for target practice the day before, and when he returned them to my quiver, some of the broadheads were facing the wrong way. I hadn't noticed. As I reached back to grab an arrow, my thumb slid across the sharp blade, slicing it open. I instinctively let out a sharp gasp of pain. I expected the deer to bolt at the sudden noise, but it didn't. Instead, I heard a long, drawn-out, garbled sound, then a deep, guttural growl. I locked eyes with the buck just as it rose onto its hind legs. It stared at me, its yellow teeth bared, sharp and unnatural. Terror paralyzed me. I couldn't move. Maybe I was afraid that if I did, it would attack. Then instinct took over. I nocked an arrow and let it fly. It hit the creature low, where a normal deer would have been fatally wounded, but it barely reacted. I nocked another arrow as it started moving toward me. This time, I aimed for its neck. The arrow struck, and the creature let out an ungodly scream before turning and running. As it fled, it dropped to all fours, moving like a normal deer again. It stopped a short distance away and turned to look at me, its glowing yellow eyes filled with something beyond animal intelligence. I wasn't about to stick around to see what it did next. I ran. I don't think I've ever moved so fast in my life. I reached my truck in record time, threw my gear into the back, and sped away, caring little for road safety. I returned to my camp a few days later to collect my belongings. The place had been destroyed. My tent was in shreds, my food either eaten or strewn everywhere, and even my books had been ripped apart. I have no idea what I encountered that day. Maybe it was some kind of cryptid, a skinwalker, or a wendigo. I always thought those were only found in places with strong Native American influence, but Mississippi had its own tribes, too. Maybe it was something else entirely, something we don't have a name for. Whatever it was, it still lingers. Every now and then, when I visit home, I'll spot a sickly-looking deer standing at the tree line, staring. Part of me wants to go back and finish what I started. But as far as I know, it hasn't hurt anyone yet. Maybe I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the way it looked at me, the way it growled, I know one thing for sure. It wasn't just a deer. I was born and raised in the state of Vermont, and I come from a mix of Algonquin and Mohawk ancestry. The story I'm about to share happened in the town of Middlebury, Vermont, near Otter Creek. While attending college in Middlebury, my friends and I often spent nights by the creek, drinking, smoking, and gathering around campfires. One particular evening, we decided to do just that. I went down to the dorm's laundry room and collected lint from the dryers to help ignite the fire. I knew starting a fire would be a challenge since it had recently snowed, leaving most of the wood damp and difficult to burn. Plus, it always fell to me to start the fire. No one else seemed to have the knack for it. Once we had everything we needed, we made our way to our usual spot overlooking the creek and started collecting firewood. The second we arrived, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease, like unseen eyes were watching me from all directions. I took note of the feeling and decided to stay alert for anything unusual. I've always trusted my instincts, they rarely lead me astray. While my friends scoured the area for firewood, I crouched down and began trying to ignite the lint within our usual stone fire ring. Suddenly, the hairs on my neck stood on end, and from below, near the frozen shore, I heard footsteps. They were heavy, similar to the sound of a deer or a large animal trudging through snow. I turned to my friend, Mike. "Did you hear that?" I asked. He glanced at me, confused, and shook his head. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then the smell hit me. It was a sickly sweet scent mixed with the unmistakable stench of rotting flesh, like roadkill baking under the sun next to a pile of spoiled fruit. I looked around, trying to see if anyone else had noticed it, but none of my friends seemed to react. Then I heard my name. The voice was distorted, like a mix of radio static and the crumpling of aluminum foil. In that split second, everything clicked. The eerie sense of being watched, the strange footsteps, the rancid odor, and now this unnatural voice. I had heard tales of the Wendigo since childhood. My grandfather always warned me about it, though I was never sure whether to believe him. But now, as everything came together, I knew exactly what was happening. Without hesitation, I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my face into the snow. My friends were calling my name, but their voices sounded distant, as if they were speaking through a tunnel. Then the voice came again. "Look at me." It almost sounded like my grandfather, but I knew better than to respond. I stayed down, eyes clenched shut, refusing to move until the smell and the footsteps vanished. Finally, I sat up, cautiously keeping my gaze on the ground until I saw my friends standing around me. Their voices sounded normal again. "We have to leave," I told them. Something in my tone must have convinced them, because they didn't question it. We walked back to the dorms in silence. Once we were inside, Mike pulled me aside and asked what had happened. I didn't want the Wendigo to follow me, so I simply said, "I just had a bad feeling, like something was out there watching us." I didn't tell anyone the full story until after I had moved away from Middlebury. None of my friends had heard or smelled anything strange that night. I believe it was after me because it knew that I knew exactly what it was. This is a personal experience that happened at my grandfather's place. My grandpa had a small cabin deep in the forest, surrounded by trees in every direction. Since I was about 12 years old, I would go hunting for rabbits and deer there every year. I also spent nights at his cabin, waking up before dawn to go out and not returning until after dusk. I always felt at ease in those woods, like they were my second home. When I turned 20, it had been a couple of years since my last hunting trip there. One evening, two of my buddies, Jake and Tom, and I decided to go paintballing in the woods. We left Tom's house and arrived at the forest about 30 minutes before nightfall. We figured we'd go in one at a time, spacing ourselves out by 5-minute intervals. I went first, choosing a good hiding spot to wait. A little later, I spotted Tom entering and settling into position. After that, Jake came in, heading further down a slope. A few minutes passed before Tom noticed me and gestured for me to join him. I carefully made my way down to where he was, and we decided to team up against Jake. The plan was for Tom to track Jake down and lead him back my way so I could ambush him with my paintball gun. It was a messed up trick, sure, but we were young, and we always pulled pranks like this on each other. I found a spot next to a big, fallen tree and crouched, waiting for them to return. Time seemed to drag on forever, and by then, the daylight had almost faded. I could only see about 50 feet ahead through the dimming forest. As I focused on the base of the slope, I suddenly heard movement coming from my left. The sound crept behind me, and I figured my friends had turned the game on me instead. I'm not small, about 5 feet 11 inches and 215 pounds. Same as them, more or less. But whatever was moving nearby sounded much larger and was walking on 2 legs. I slowly turned my head, scanning the darkening woods, but I saw nothing but trees and shadows. I strained my eyes to make out any shape beyond the gloom, but it was no use. The footsteps kept approaching, and my nerves kicked in. I thought, no way they're gonna tag me first. I raised my paintball gun and fired in the direction of the sound, letting loose until I was out of ammo. The second I stopped shooting, Jake and Tom came running, asterisk from the opposite direction. Asterisk, they asked what the hell I was aiming at. I told them what had happened and realized I had never heard whatever it was leave. A chill ran down my spine. Without another word, the 3 of us got out of there as fast as we could, spooked by whatever was lurking in those woods. Something as big or bigger than a person walking on 2 legs, but definitely not one of us. None of us have gone back to that forest since. It was the winter break of 2023. I had just gotten home after a long semester at university. My childhood home, though we had moved since, was on the north shore of Maine. My friends and I were all 21 years old. Every night we would hang out at our buddy's place, but on this particular night he had to work late. He had chosen to get a job instead of going back to school. I don't recall the exact time, but since it was winter, the sun had already set by dinner. To pass the time before our friend got off work, we decided to take a walk in the nearby forest. We were about 1.5 miles into the woods, following a trail that led to an old fire watchtower roughly 3 miles in. As we walked, something strange happened. The wind stopped. It wasn't gradual, just sudden. 1 second, the wind was howling through the trees, and the next, absolute silence. But the trees were still moving, rocking back and forth as if the wind were still blowing. We all froze. One of my friends, D, looked at the other, K, then at me. "You guys hear that?" he asked. K replied, "No, that's the thing. I can still feel the wind, but there's no sound." D muttered, "Something isn't right." I wasn't much of a talker, more of an observer. As they discussed how weird the situation was, I noticed a soft, faint bluish glow in the dense underbrush about 5 yards to our right. "Hey, do you guys see that?" I asked. "Yeah, what is that?" my friends responded. "No idea. Want to check it out?" My curiosity was getting the better of me. "I mean, we've got time to kill," Kay shrugged. I started walking toward the glow, pushing through the snow-covered branches. We had barely stepped 5 feet closer when the light vanished, completely, as if it had never been there. "Maybe it was just the moon reflecting," Kay said. We agreed and turned to keep walking toward the tower. But the moment we turned, the trail we had been following was gone. Only dense forest stretched before us. There weren't even footprints in the snow to show where the trail had been, just the prints leading to where we stood. "Wait, where's the path?" D asked, his voice uneasy. "What the hell?" Kay muttered. We stood there for a long moment, searching for any sign of the trail. Nothing. The only sound was our own breathing and our voices. Everything else was silent. "Let's just retrace our steps," I suggested. "Maybe we just lost sight of the path." The others nodded, and we started walking back the way we thought we had come. 5 minutes passed, way longer than it had taken us to step off the trail, and yet there was still no sign of the path. That's when we noticed something else. Every footstep we made in the snow had an echo, but not a normal one. This echo came several seconds after we took each step, as if something were mimicking our movements. At one point, D nudged me and subtly held up his phone. I glanced down at the screen. A text message from him read, "I think we're being followed." Now, D was the ultimate outdoorsman. He could walk barefoot on any terrain as long as there was no snow. He could climb a tree like it was second nature. We used to joke that he might not even be human. So when he said something was wrong, we knew to listen. "Let's just keep moving until we find anything resembling a path," he said. And so we did. God only knows how long we walked, but eventually we came across a small clearing, just a few feet of space between trees and underbrush. It wasn't the trail, but it was something. The second we stepped into it, the wind returned. That strange, delayed echo stopped. Not long after, we spotted a familiar rock, one we had passed on the way in. We exhaled in relief, realizing we were finally on track to find our way back to the cars. But then, D whispered, "Look at the rock." We turned. First, it looked completely normal, but the longer we stared, the more we noticed a bluish glow behind it. Then, the glow lowered, and a large, shadowy canine form emerged from behind the rock. Its eyes gleamed yellow. It stared at us. A sudden wave of heat rushed through me, an unnatural, suffocating warmth mixed with pure dread. The creature turned, walking away, but after a few steps, it stopped and looked back, almost as if disappointed. Then it melted into the trees and was gone. We looked at each other, speechless, shaken. Without another word, we hurried back to our cars. We agreed never to tell anyone else in our friend group. Who would believe us? Anyway, none of us ever returned to those woods. But sometimes I feel an urge to go back, and only at night. I hesitated to share this before, but a close friend encouraged me to tell my story. This experience made me never want to ride my motorcycle at night again. And by motorcycle, I mean a Yamaha YZF R6. It was May 2022 when I went to help a buddy of mine who lived deep in the countryside. Before this, I only believed in ghosts. I'd had encounters with them, but what I came across that night was no spirit. It was something real. You can call me Alex. My friend, Mark, called me on my night off and said, "Hey, Alex, can you come over and help me find my dog?" He ran off earlier and hasn't come back. I could hear the stress in his voice. I sighed and replied, "I told you to keep him on a leash." His dog was a German Shepherd and Boxer mix, but despite her size, she was a sweetheart who thought she was a lapdog. I got dressed, grabbed my jacket and helmet, then took my bike out of the garage, locking everything up behind me. Mark's house wasn't that far, about a 2-hour ride. I always took this small, quiet road I loved riding down, but that night, I felt something watching me. I couldn't tell where the feeling was coming from, so I sped up, but the sensation remained. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something pitch black. I accelerated, but whatever it was seemed to match my speed. I pushed the throttle again. That's when I saw it, blue eyes reflecting the light. What kind of creature has blue eyes that glow? Just as quickly as they appeared, they vanished, but the feeling of being watched never left. I didn't slow down until I reached Mark's place. He was waiting for me outside with flashlights in hand. "Open the garage," I told him, wanting to put my bike inside. Normally, I left it outside, but as soon as I arrived, the sense of being watched intensified. Helmet still on, I asked, "Do you feel like you're being watched?" He frowned. "You okay?" I shook my head. "Something's off. Can I borrow one of your guns?" Mark nodded, grabbing a pistol before we set out in different directions to search for the dog. I held the gun in one hand and the flashlight in the other, walking until I noticed a trail. Something heavy had been dragged through the dirt. My unease grew stronger. I kept scanning my surroundings, regretting not taking off my helmet. Then, I stepped in something thick and dark. My breath caught as I looked down. That's when I saw her, Mark's dog. She had been torn apart by something. I crouched down and grabbed her collar. That's when I heard it, growling, deep and menacing, like a dog guarding its food. I lifted my flashlight, heart pounding, and saw it. A massive figure loomed over 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in black fur, and its head resembled a huge wolf's. But this thing stood on 2 legs. Its limbs were too long, its hands too large, each finger tipped with razor-sharp claws, dripping with something dark. No, that had to be blood. The growl deepened, drawing my attention back to its face. I aimed the gun, hands shaking, took a step forward, spreading its arms wide. I fired twice, but it didn't react. No flinch, no pain, nothing. I had no choice. I turned and ran, and I won't lie, I nearly lost control of my bladder. Whatever this thing was, it was right behind me. "Mark, run," I yelled. He listened. The creature must have thrown something because something hard slammed into my helmet, nearly knocking me over. Mark, being closer, reached the house first and flung the door open. "Come on," he screamed. I risked a glance back. It was still chasing me, this time on all 4s, and I swear, it was smiling. I sprinted inside, and Mark slammed the door shut, locking it instantly. "What the hell was that?" he panted. I yanked off my helmet, breathing hard. My stomach twisted when I saw a deep gash across the back of it. That was almost my head. Then we heard it, slow, heavy breathing just outside the house. Mark's gaze dropped to the bloodied collar in my grip. His expression a mix of grief and fury. Something in my gut told me to turn around. I did, and there it was, peering through the window with a wide, toothy grin. Mark grabbed his shotgun, hands trembling, but the creature took a step back and melted into the darkness. I stayed the night, but I couldn't sleep. Footsteps circled the house for hours. Just before dawn, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the trees. Then, the footsteps faded away. I didn't leave until the sun was high in the sky. Mark kept his shotgun close the whole time. Before I rode off, I gave him the collar, and he broke down crying. I felt horrible for him and for that poor, loving dog. When I finally left, I took a different route home, flooring it the entire way. I didn't stop, not even once. By some miracle, I avoided getting pulled over. After that night, I bought a car. I got a gun permit and a concealed carry license. To my fellow riders, avoid dark, secluded roads at night. Wait until daylight or go in a group. Whatever you do, don't make the mistake I did. And if you see glowing blue eyes watching you from the shadows, don't stop. Just go. When I was 16, I lived on the outskirts of a quiet little town called Oak Ridge, Texas. This happened on a Saturday during the Labor Day weekend. My older brother and I had just finished dinner with our parents, and I was helping my mom clean up the table when she casually wondered aloud, "I wonder how packed the lake is tonight." My brother shrugged and said, "I'll drive down and check it out." He then turned to me and asked if I wanted to come along. Figured, why not? So, I slipped on my shoes and we hopped into his car, heading toward the lake. After a short drive, we reached an old, makeshift bridge. It wasn't much, just a large metal pipe cut in half and placed over a small creek, covered with gravel. There were no guardrails on either side. That's when we noticed something or someone crouched down near the gravel as if playing with it. My brother slowed the car, and at first I assumed it was a hunter. It was hunting season after all, but something felt off. Hunters typically wear reflective vests at night, and this figure had nothing of the sort. The fading light should have caught on any bright material, but there was none. Even in a crouched position, this thing looked huge. Its arms were thick, and when it finally stood up, it towered over us, easily over 7 feet tall. It was completely covered in thick, dark hair. There was no sign of clothing, no indication that this was just some person. Its limbs were long, and most unsettling of all were its eyes. When the headlights hit them, they glowed a deep, eerie red. Then, in a single, fluid motion, the creature stepped to the left and disappeared into the dense brush beside the road. My brother drove forward slowly, scanning the area to see where it had gone. But it was just gone. After a moment of silence, I finally spoke. "What was that?" My brother gripped the steering wheel and muttered, "No idea. Maybe a hunter." I shook my head. That wasn't a hunter. It wasn't even wearing clothes. And where was its truck? There weren't any vehicles around. We kept driving until we reached the lake. The place was packed. Families camping, kids playing, people enjoying the long weekend. Everything felt so normal, so far removed from what we had just seen. After a moment, my brother said, "Let's go back, see if it's still there." I stared at him. "Are you serious? What if it comes after us?" But he had already turned the car around. By the time we reached the bridge again, my heart was pounding. And then, sure enough, there it was, just like before, crouched in the middle of the bridge, playing with the gravel. The moment our headlights swept over it, the creature stood up, turned its massive head toward us, and then stepped back into the brush. This time, my brother pulled into a driveway nearby, backed up, and parked at the top of a hill overlooking the bridge. He switched off the car. I swallowed hard. "What are you doing?" "I want to see if it comes back," he said, his eyes locked on the bridge. For 20 minutes, we sat in silence, watching. Nothing happened. Eventually, he sighed, started the car, and we headed home. The moment we walked inside, I blurted out what we saw to our parents. My dad just laughed, shaking his head. He never believed in things like that. My mom, however, turned to my brother. "Is that really what you saw?" My brother hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I mean, unless it was just some really hairy guy wandering around the woods at night." That night, I called my boyfriend and told him everything. At least he believed me. I never saw that thing again. And for years, I kept the story to myself, until I met the man who would become my husband. My brother and I went on a fishing trip to Clearwater Lake in Missouri. We'd been there countless times, exploring every corner. We left on a Thursday morning and arrived late in the afternoon. We brought a small fishing boat and just the essentials: a tent, my rifle, and some firewood. We didn't pack much food, figuring we could live off fish and maybe some small game if necessary. We loaded everything onto the boat and set off before sundown. The only light we had was from the boat's navigation lamps and a little flashlight. After about an hour on the water, we came across a secluded cove. Perfect for us since it was so isolated, meaning we could relax without worrying about anyone bothering us. Once we reached shore, we unloaded the boat and set up camp. My brother started a fire while I grabbed my fishing rod since I was starving. After a few minutes, I noticed something strange. Complete silence. No crickets, no birds, not even the usual splashes of fish jumping. Even weirder, I wasn't getting a single bite. Frustrated, I gave up and started walking back to the camp, which we had set up about 30 feet from the water. When I got back, I asked my brother if he'd noticed how eerily quiet it was. He shrugged it off, saying he hadn't really been paying attention. And then we heard it, a long, deep howl, coming from what sounded like a mile away. The sound sent a chill down my spine. My brother tensed up. I laughed nervously. "Come on, we're grown men. It's probably just a coyote." He nodded in agreement, and we both decided to turn in for the night. Still, I kept my gun close just in case. The howl had felt too close for comfort. The next morning, we got up early and decided to check if we could find any tracks or signs of the coyote we'd heard. We ventured about a half-mile into the woods. Before long, we stumbled upon something unsettling. A large, dead coyote, completely torn apart. It was lying just a few feet off the trail. My brother was fascinated, trying to figure out what could have done this. I, on the other hand, wanted nothing more than to get back to camp. When we returned, I grabbed my phone and texted our dad, asking what kind of predators around here could take down a coyote like that. He responded saying maybe a cougar, but that seemed unlikely in Missouri. I figured it could have been another coyote fighting for dominance. We both agreed to stay just one more night. Neither of us wanted to risk running into whatever had done that to the coyote. We took the boat back out to fish, heading to a rocky ledge we called our lucky spot since we always caught something there. We spent the whole day fishing and didn't stop until the sun started setting. Hungry and tired, we called it a day and made our way back to camp. Our little boat wasn't fast, but it was still better than paddling. By the time we reached the shore, it was completely dark, and the full moon shone overhead. The silence was back. We pulled the boat onto the shore and walked toward our campfire pit, planning to cook our catch. But as soon as we reached our campsite, our hearts dropped. The place was wrecked. Our tent was shredded, gear thrown everywhere. It looked like someone or something had been searching for something. Without a word, we both reached for our rifles, flipped the safeties off, and exchanged a look that said the same thing. Time to leave. We didn't even bother collecting our stuff. Just as we turned toward the boat, a deep, guttural growl echoed from the trees. My brother grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. What we saw made our blood run cold. Two large, glowing yellow eyes, about 5 feet above the ground, stared back at us. We froze, too terrified to move. My brother jumped into the boat and fired up the motor. I slowly backed toward him, never taking my eyes off whatever was watching us. The moment I climbed in, I glanced away for just a second. When I looked back, the eyes were gone. We moved about 30 feet into the water before I used the flashlight again, scanning the shore. And then I saw it, the same eyes, stepping out from the tree line. It came to the water's edge, and under the dim glow of the moon, I got a better look. It resembled a wolf, but it wasn't quite right. It moved on all fours, but as it reached the water, it stood up on 2 legs. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. Then, it let out a howl that made my bones shake. I pointed the flashlight at it. That's when I saw that it was holding something. Our tent fabric, clutched in its clawed hand. I shoved my brother out of the way and slammed the throttle to full power, despite being in a no-wake zone. We had to get out of there. Once we reached the dock, we threw the boat onto the trailer and sped off. We didn't speak the entire drive home. We never told our parents, though I'm sure they wondered what happened to our tent and cooler. I'm in my late 30s now. I haven't set foot near Clearwater Lake since. And if you ever go, be careful.